Hey everybody, yes, let's have a look at this stuff. So I'm trying to get the forklift running as usual with everything you do on farming stuff and stuff around the place. You end up spending so long on batteries, and you know, everything's usually flat when you go to get it. Worse when the we're in lockdown and shut down because of these things that are going on. So it's quite interesting. I was watching on a lot of the Facebook stuff how many people are so absolutely ridiculously mind-washed, brainwashed with government garbage. And you know, they say that domestic violence is up by 40%, yet they don't tell you how or why they say it's up by 40%. I don't believe their statistics off the cuff, because there's so much rubbish goes on and lies go on with Scummo and the premiers. Like, he knew about the fires 3 years before the fires happened with Lantana in these states and did nothing at all about it. He knew about the criminal activities of the premiers misleading the public in regards to the threat that these materials caused with the fires, and did absolutely nothing about it. So at the end of the day, there's not a lot of love lost there with somebody as dishonest as what he is and the crew are. I guess that's one of the big things that we face as a nation when you look at this stuff. The lies that continually get told now about this domestic violence, you know, all of the people who work for themselves, all the self-employed people, whether that be self-employed through businesses, you know, through restaurants, through all of these different businesses, all cease to have a business. None of these people can walk into Centrelink and get immediate money. Most of them waited probably about 4 or 6 weeks before they really realised how serious this was. Their households have zero income into them, and we just get to hear from these grubs that say, oh, trust the government, trust the government, trust the government, you know, they're doing the right thing. Absolute rubbish. These clowns created this economy over this period of time, over the last 3-4 years, to where it was zero growth. I mean, anywhere else, any other time in my life, that's been classed as a recession and listed as a recession, and yet never have we heard those words in the last 4 years, 5 years. But in that time, we've had fires caused by the councils operating illegally in cahoots with the state government. And then Morrison makes out he doesn't know anything about this, and he has to pay for a royal commission to try and clear his backside. I hope somewhere along this line, and I've contacted the royal commission, that they actually bother to want to hear from the experts in the trade, rather than the cover-up that is going on now, where they just hear from national parks, they hear from fire services, they hear from these groups, you know, instead of actually dealing with the facts of the fuel load on the ground that the premiers and prime ministers knew about. And the prime minister knew about what these scum-sucking parasites called premiers were doing in New South Wales and Queensland. You know, to have run an economy into the ground as they had done, to now collapse that economy, and the greatest majority of workers that work for themselves, okay, have no income, have had no income. Would it be a surprise to expect that arguments between husbands and wives and families is at an all-time high, when no one is allowing these people to actually post their comments? I've not seen anywhere where anybody is posting their comments in Australia about their lives at this point in time. We see tons of stuff posted from grubs that are walking around with their phones and their cameras in their shopping bag and shopping trolley, and pointing to people being stuck in traffic from the aisle back where there is no room to be able to get through the checkouts, and they are making out this is a criminal problem and everything else. You just have to get by. People aren't dying from going to the shopping centre, they're not dying from a lot of other things, but they are banned from actually being able to communicate with each other. Your posts are being censored. People aren't seeing your posts. And that's what I suspect is going on with all of these people that were self-employed, that were carrying the country, the last lot of people working in this country. But don't worry, because all of the government workers still get paid. You know, this is one of the greatest scams and what's-the-names that the self-employed should be actually rising up and taking action against this whole load of rubbish, against this government on this basis, because these people's children aren't being fed. They're losing their homes, they're losing their vehicles, they're losing everything they worked for. And the grubs that post on Facebook saying, oh, I trust the government, oh, this is no problem, we're doing it for our grandchildren, we're doing it for our grandparents. There's a huge, probably at least 70% to 80% of Australia is starving to death today. And that includes farmers. Farmers having to plough their crops in and destroy their crops because they can't get their crops harvested. You know, we're being lied to at so many levels by people who are government workers who have never lost a cent in any part of this. They're still getting paid every single day. And then now they're going, oh, well, the Public Servants Union is, you know, all up in arms because their wages have been frozen through this terrible time and they're actually having to work for a living. Well, welcome to the real world. If ever you guys feel hard done by, get your asses up and come out and work with me. You won't last an hour working with me at my pace in the real world. And you guys are saying you're hard done by in Centrelink and Family Services? I mean, we need to deal with this because these people, if you write them a letter or ask them a question, they say it'll be between 4 and 6 weeks before we respond to you. And we accept this as being okay. I mean, all they want to do is then let's put more public servants in place because we can get the time frame to respond down to what, 5 weeks instead of 6 weeks? No, it's not good enough anymore. We've all been paying way too much to these people and just using the guise of saying, well, if they weren't working there, they'd be unemployed. So at least they're not unemployed, they're getting paid something. But none of us get paid. None of us, not a cent at all. And you're not eligible. If you go to Centrelink, you have to be out of work for this amount of time, and you'll never meet the criteria to get these grants that this government's throwing around. Have a look at the fire situation. You know, this grub said that no one would be left behind and he'd be fixing up these fire destruction. $2 billion. People are living in tents. Tell you what, Australia, you need to wake up when you look at living in southern New South Wales and Victoria in a tent at any time of year. But between 2 to 6 months' time, we should be sticking this grub that runs our country in that tent. Force him and his family to stay in a tent down there with no other provisions for a week or two. Don't make it for a day. These people need to be woken up and jailed for what they knew about the fires before the fires started. You know, it's proven, documented fact that this guy knew about the flammability and the destruction that lantana causes on a climate change basis. And they did absolutely nothing, and they planned to do nothing at any time in our history, these people. And yet all we hear from are these other groups saying, oh, don't post that, that has no value because it's telling the truth. It's asking questions. So you think that these farmers having to destroy their crops because they can't get them picked is going to be okay? I've always said we are headed for some really serious hardship with food in this country very soon. Politicians don't feed the people. They never have, they never will. They couldn't run a business. They are not successful in anything. But they can lie, cheat and steal every step of the way, and we just go, well, we expect that of a Premier or a Prime Minister. Well, the costs that we are paying with our families with no income, finance companies knocking on the door before this started because the country's been in recession for so long with these people. I mean, you know, they couldn't close an umbrella. And all of these carriers came into this country with these people allowing them to do it. I mean, it got onto the ships because people came in on planes and hopped straight across onto the ships to continue their voyage. I mean, nobody's talking about that. You know, people are going, oh, well, you know, somehow it got onto the ships. We think it was released onto the ships. Are you seriously that naive? How many connecting holidays connect flights to ships, and the people came over, hopped on the ships, and that's how the disease got onto the ships? But the ships are completely contained environments, so everything spreads through ships. But here we are, paying the consequence for our government's failures. Now we're not allowed to talk to each other, we're not allowed to gather, we're not allowed to do things with each other, even with social distancing. Explain that. You know, if you have some land and you can plant veggies and whatnot, why could you not have people come and plant veggies and do their own thing over there? Hey, why would they not want us to talk? Why would they have the censorship so high through Facebook that posts are not being seen by the average people? Only the closest people on Facebook see your posts. And then lots of notifications are not sent to the owner of the page. There's some really sus stuff going on with censorship and with martial law controls over people in Australia today. You know, we have to start dealing with what they're doing and say, hey, listen, don't step this up anymore, because there's no cure to this disease. And you've got people talking garbage on Facebook and other platforms saying, well, would you want your family to get it? Would you want your family? Everybody's going to get it, you fool. There is no cure. We have never cured the common cold, and you are dealing with the same type of situation. What idiot thinks that there's going to be a cure to this? No vaccine that they've ever done, has been successful on coronavirus, ever. None have been, on, buddy, the flu or the common cold. You know, nobody that gets the flu shot says I'm immune to the flu. They all still get it. They just get it at a lesser degree, according to the experts. But, you know, the amount of people that I know that constantly get the flu shots and still get the flus is the greatest majority of people. I don't know anybody who got the flu vaccination and then didn't get some form of flu. So it's subjective to say, well, it was less of a dose of the flu than what they would have got, because I don't think that's true. But here we are. We have a huge section of the population not voicing their opinions. Now, you think that these people, having no money coming into their homes, threatened with repossession of everything they've ever worked for, are not angry, are not upset, are not voicing their thoughts? But 7 and 9, they have people wandering around with phones hidden in their shopping carts, in their baskets, filming people trying to walk past each other in a shopping centre. Go dob in a neighbour because I don't believe they're doing what I believe should happen. Go and get nicked. Hold your phone up full height and show people you're filming them and see how far you go. Real Australians won't stand for it if you do it. I'd love to see you do it. I'd love to see you do it to me. You'd be short-shifted, no problems at all. You know, it's absolutely ridiculous that Australia accepts cowards and grubs like this, filming them and doing these things to them, and not absolutely hitting back at these people or against the establishment. Put it on the table where you say this domestic violence is up by 40%. Exactly who is committing these crimes, where, and what was the outcome for it. Because if it's related, as I suspect, to all of these self-employed people, which is a huge, the greatest majority of the public, and there is zero money coming in for those people. The financial hardship in their homes is completely different to the people who are saying, oh, trust the government, they're all right. What if your grandmother or whatever gets it? Everybody's going to get this thing. There is no chance you're not going to get it. Oh, we're flattening the curve, we're doing magnificent things. These people didn't run an economy that was crap that they created. No manufacturing left in Australia because they upped the electricity costs so far that all domestic production in Australia, manufacture in Australia, is gone. These people couldn't run the nation when it was somewhat working. So you think they're going to get it started? With all of these jobs will never start again. We have just created an entire generation of paupers. The amount of people who are going to be homeless because of this, and you're telling people that this is a good idea, you're not dealing with any of the consequences of what those actions were. This thing isn't even, 60 dead in buddy 8 weeks, 60 dead in 27 million. I mean, you'd have to be the most foolish, uneducated person in the world to believe those statistics are worth what we're paying for it today. You're talking about, what did they say? 1,300 people in, 6,000 people, is it? 6,000 people are active out of 330,000 tests in 27 million people. This is the same scam that the government pulled when they pulled it on Hendra virus in horses. This isn't new territory to these grubs. You have a look at just how far that goes. We've got 900,000 horses in Australia to 1.8 million horses in Australia, which tells you the government has no clue how many horses are in Australia. 4 people died, 7 people got sick, 4 people died, 57% death toll. 2 of those people were performing autopsies on the horses back before they were really sure of exactly how they should handle it. Now we have vets saying that horses will not be treated. Okay? Horses are being shot by owners. They are being destroyed by owners because owners cannot get treatment for those animals. They're dying from just minor common ailments like colic. Yet the government Department of Workplace Health and Safety worked and conspired with biosecurity. One of the greatest grubs in our nation's history is biosecurity on all levels. And you have a look at it, and they conspired and charged vets $45,000 each, where they could have charged them about $400 each to make examples of them. And those vets will not deal with your domestic, non-vaccinated horse. Now, the government tells us that 11% of the horses are vaccinated in the nation. Did you know that no racehorses are vaccinated? Okay, you have a look at that misrepresentation there. Because they represent such a big part of the actual ownership of horses in the nation, they still get veterinary care. They get veterinary care for all of those subjects. So they still get treatment, even though they're unvaccinated. And these grubs lie to the public, the domestic public, and tell them they can't have treatment for their horses. Now, you're right. What does it have to do with coronavirus and this whole thing? It's the same scam that they've done. Even if you took the lowest figure and you said 900,000 horses, 4 people died. 2 of them died that were dissecting the horses in the exploratory stages of it. 10 years later, no new deaths of people. 100 horses in total have been accounted for in Hendra virus across the entire nation. I mean, it's the greatest scam of money-making garbage that has ever been put before the people, and you all sign up for it. Nobody says a word about the thing. I've asked RSPCA. They won't even open their mouths. That's how grubby RSPCA is. I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. They know this scam's been going on this whole time, and yet they won't even touch the horses' rights. All of these people knew how bad these things were for the ecology and how the bushfires killed all the koalas long before the fires ever happened. They had it all in front of them and they did nothing about it. So these scams run by the government have been going for a very long time. But they're very good at running the scams. They run the fear factor and people just buy into it and say, well, you know what, I'll vote for that, or I'll go along with that because I want to believe that my Premier and my Prime Minister care about things. It's not until you look at the real picture and you see how much of this devastation is going to be forwarded onto us with the loss of all of these foods from these farmers. And the farmers are starving to death then. If a farmer's forced to destroy their cash crop, their crop, then they are going without food and money. It has a huge knock-on effect. The transport industry doesn't cart that produce. The public never gets to see those foods. You have a look at how bare the shelves are. That's okay because that's only toiletries. That's only small items. You know, you wait till it's actual food that's not on the counters then, and we're heading for it. We're madly exhausting the last remnants of what food we do have available to bring in. So there are not very happy times, and if domestic violence was up by that number because people can't get food into their homes because they worked for themselves, then hang on to your socks because it's about to get a hell of a lot worse throughout all of that time. And you need to start discussing it, and people need to be able to start telling people about what it's like to have been self-employed in Australia and to have gone down this path with this government and this so-called disease, because the numbers don't match. If you only got 60 dead in an 8-week period on the most horrifically contagious material that we've ever known, there's something doesn't make sense. 6,000 number is not a significant number of the population. And it doesn't matter if you claim you locked them down. That's a load of crap. That's a load of crap. Every single person went to a common place in that time. See, this is the problem. None of you can add up or think. None of these people didn't get food. They went to a supermarket. Okay, they're still gathering because they have to gather, because the government can't stop them from getting food. Otherwise, you've got a whole different problem with rioting and people taking the law into their own hands. If money spread disease, then we'd all been dead 100 years ago. None of this crap that the government spreads is the greater majority of the public smart enough to be able to go, hold on a minute, that doesn't make sense. These people are still going to the supermarket and still buying groceries. They're still gathering. They're still passing each other in the shopping aisles, and nobody's coughing when I've been there. Nobody's going, oh my God, my throat, oh, I'm dying, I'm dying, I'm dying. And you look at the numbers and they do not make sense for what you've done to the economy, unless there is another agenda that you are collapsing the economy to create an absolute need on communism and on a government-run society. That could be the only outcome you could be seeking, because if these people aren't intelligent enough, that's the government, to see that once you've shut down all of that private enterprise workforce, that self-employed workforce, and it doesn't exist anymore. These people can't go back and earn the money to register their vehicles, to get back on the road and get back to work. And the other part of the public are never going to spend money on doing jobs to do other things. So the economy is completely collapsed. And just a second, but while you can't add things up or think for yourself, think about this. Our entire taxation-based system was based on consumerism. So you made cars, you made boats, you made trucks, you made tractors, you made everything, okay? You made food. Well, those people can't afford to buy any of those vehicles or things anymore. They can't afford it. What are they going to buy it with? You're going to go to the bank and say, hey, listen, I don't have a job anymore. My industry is completely shut down and gone, but I need to replace a vehicle, or I need to buy a vehicle. How is that economy going to work? You just collapsed it. I've heard people say, oh, maybe this was the whole purpose of this. They're just going to reset and reboot the whole economy. How would that work? Everybody owns nothing and we just go, okay, from this point on, we just hit the button and we go zero and we start working from there. None of it makes sense. Nobody is thinking about how would you do that? How could you possibly do it? How will you buy food? Food has to be worth something. The farmer grew it, the farmer produced it, and all of these other people manufactured it into something else or whatever they did, processed it. They have to be paid, don't they? How do you start the clock at zero? You can't. But these people that were self-employed have no money. They are actually behind the 8 ball now. Most of the people within the nation around the world were living on credit that they couldn't pay. How do you restart that clock? Somebody's not telling you the truth. So go back to the people living in tents in northern New South Wales, southern New South Wales and Victoria. And how are those people going to deal with the weather that's coming very shortly to them? on a Prime Minister that told you, I will not leave these people behind. I will not allow these. We will rebuild everything. We will fix everything because we caused it. We'll fix it. That's the only reason why he said he'd do that. But then nobody looks over their shoulder and says, well, hold on a minute. That was what, 5 months ago? And they're living in tents today. You trust your Prime Minister? You trust the premiers that consorted with the councils? Let's have a real good look at that. Lantana Camara is Australia's worst weed. In 60 countries around the world, it's in the top 10 of the worst invasive weeds in the world. And the greatest climate change changer in the world, in Australia. And it's the worst invasive weed for endangered species in Australia, and that was found by the top 10 universities in 2019 in February. And our government, our Premier and Prime Minister, allow councils to mislead the public. That stuff burns like petrol, and it is decimating our forests, and nobody says a word about it. That's why those fires in New South Wales and Victoria were so extreme. It's not climate change, it's not drought. It is because these materials make up anything from 4,000 cubic metres per acre to 40,000 cubic metres and more per acre. And it was illegal for them to grow there. And their span and zone of influence, just for the record, can be as high as 2,000 kilometres on government record. So how did the councils suddenly, illegally mislead the public with the Premier's knowledge and the Premier's support of New South Wales and Queensland? And nobody in the fur industry, and I mean the right for lifers for the animals, for the koalas and that, ever take this on? Why did not the climate change people understand the impacts that Lantana has on climate change in Australia? Why did they not do that? Because they get fed off that government funding. The government owns them. They're not-for-profit organisations and the government owns them, so they will say whatever the government wants. But as soon as we start looking into the facts of exactly how Lantana Camara destroys entire ecosystems, then we start to understand the corruption that allowed those fires to happen in New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria. But those fires are nothing. No, they're nothing. They are nothing compared to what is coming in this next 12-month period and the next 12 months after that. Nothing at all. They are insignificant little tiny fires. And we will run out of luck. We will see huge numbers of our people die in those fires. They will get trapped on roads where the fire links around and cuts them off, and we see huge convoys of people absolutely burned alive. But that's what it'll take before you stand up to the premiers and prime ministers that have collapsed our economy. that caused those fires. It wasn't an accident, they caused them. And it'll be very interesting to see whether the Royal Commission contacts me back, because I sent them a email asking them to do so, because they need to hear from actual experts in the field that don't exist in government, not the corruption that created those levels of infestations and then lied about their involvement in the fires. We need to see these people start to be jailed for their crimes. But when you look at the levels of infestations that actually flow through those lands, why do people then go after that and go, oh, now we feel sorry for the koalas burned alive, now we feel sorry for these animals? Why do we allow the Red Cross and all these organisations, the Salvation Army, to collect millions upon millions of dollars, and then to say, well, we're not giving it to the fire victims, we're going to keep it for the next catastrophe that happens? I mean, you stood by while this happened and these people got put in tents on their own land. All that means is that there's going to be a lot more people joining those people in tents on land that is worthless. When the house is gone off that land, a lot of that land is worthless. It is not worth the mortgage price on that land. That land will never carry other stock and other ways of paying for it, because you allowed it to be destroyed, because you allowed these people to continue to grow these materials around you unrestricted, illegally. You didn't even care enough to go, is he telling the truth about legal or illegal? The Biosecurity Act 2014 was written with the express purpose to protect our environment. And biosecurity officers have been circumventing that law from the top of biosecurity in Queensland and New South Wales for decades. Well, all over every single state's exactly the same. Every single state's exactly the same. And they state that Lantana Camara will be in every state. So, you know, the people that go, oh, well, that's not our weed, we don't have to worry about that, but it's holding all of the high country, you need to understand what I know and then start to deal with this properly. Because it's anywhere from a $250 billion to a $500 billion problem, depending on the terrain that it inhabits. That is not insignificant. And the fact that it's killing all of our hardwood forestry trees, the fact that it turns every forestry fire into a canopy fire. I mean, it was never climate change, but this material is the #1 climate change changer in the world in 60 countries. And the governments are still lying to all of the people as it destroys more and more country, more and more land. You just got to wait a little while and you'll see the fires back closer to home. Even if you live in suburbia, you're going to start seeing fires come raging down watercourses. I mean, just locally here at the Gap, it sends shivers up my spine when I look at what Brisbane City Council do there. And Brisbane City Council was named by the Premier as one of the criminals lying to the public, lying to the citizens, lying to the ratepayers. She said, I'm aware that there is nothing low risk about Lantana. There's nothing in my Biosecurity Act, which is the law about Lantana, that refers to it in any shape or form as low risk. Yet, she said 2 years ago, I know that Brisbane City Council have it illegally listed on their biosecurity plan as being very low risk. Not low risk, they have it as very low risk. And a few of these councils have it as very low risk. It's criminal. It has always been criminal. And it's criminal. I'm not joking about the word criminal. It's illegal, okay? The way it works is the state law is the law, okay? The state law cannot have something lower than the federal level. That works exactly the same as it goes down the train. So the local governments, the councils, cannot have a law or regulation at a lower level than what the state government has it. So the Biosecurity Act is the law. Okay, and it says lantana cannot be released into the environment. And it was written for the express purpose of protecting our lands. That is all of our lands. That is all our biodiversity. That is all our biosecurity. That is our entire environmental law is hinged on protecting the lands that are not infested today. That includes the land the material is on. So if the material is increasing on the land, then it is considered a breach of the Biosecurity Act, as per biosecurity officers stating this, and the councils must take action to issue notices to the landowner and then have that dealt with. Under Section 263 of the Biosecurity Act, the court acknowledges that responsibility, and it states that the councils can and will take action to remove those materials either by their services or by contractors working for them. And those monies, if they are not paid back to the councils, will be put on the rates of the properties so that the government entities are guaranteed to get their money back. Now here's the kicker. Lantana is not allowed to be released into the environment. That includes its seeds. It is not allowed to be increasing on the property it's on. And Part 3 of that says that that material is not allowed to leave that property and infest somebody else. And the Biosecurity Act was written to protect our environment, our heritage, our flora and our fauna. Then why did the Greens allow this to all take place? Because they don't know what lantana looks like? They can't identify lantana growing on the sides of the roads in the worst physical place it can be allowed to grow, illegally, and the councils have driven past that for 30 years, allowing it to expand across your private lands? Some people are frightened because they have it on their lands, and they are frightened that, if the government gets serious about it, they'll eventually come knocking on the door and force them to clean up. Okay, but you want to be more frightened of the fact that when the fires come through, you're going to lose your home, your neighbour's going to lose their home because of the materials growing on your land, and you'll be held accountable. Now that's where you should be backing this up and hearing this next piece. The government has no special get-out-of-jail clause. Okay, it was always required that the state government and federal government and the local government all adhere to the law. Now they haven't. I can prove to you that the councils circumvented environmental law and biosecurity law with the Premier's condolences helping them. When she secretly lowered that classification of lantana, she committed a crime, and she committed an environmental disaster. Nothing lives in lantana or under lantana when it gets to stage 2 and stage 3 infestations. It is the biggest destroyer of biodiversity in this nation. It burns like petrol, and it has antimicrobial features, so it destroys soil health. The fires that it causes destroys everything. Look at these fires. Nothing was left. The fires 2 years ago, 3 years ago in Mackay, around Mackay, destroyed everything, including the old growth trees. Those things didn't never happen before. It's not climate change. It's these materials were illegally allowed to grow in those environments by our premiers and our prime ministers. And I can prove they had knowledge of this. I've been writing to them for 3 years that I can actually pull the documents out and show people. These fires are happening because we have 4,000 to 40,000 cubic meters of material that's not allowed to be there. It was never allowed to be there. It's killing our hardwood forests that they knew for 30 years, not just from my work telling them, but that's documented. They've known for 30 years this dieback in the Australian forestry caused by lantana has been going on. And the fires that increase as a result of that, it's not climate change. It's that they let these materials grow there. But these materials flood down the things. And that's what I changed. I forcibly made it known and proved that lantana is spread by water. It's number one, without a shadow of a doubt. Transporter of these materials is water. The seeds float. They float all the way across dams, watercourses, onto the other side and continue their path downstream. The fires that then rally down those watercourses, okay, all of the streams, the riparian zones, destroy all of that material. But that is the key area that lantana must control. It's the key area that the government never knew about, they never dealt with, because they have no knowledge, they have no capabilities in this. So when those fires run down or up those watercourses, it then bare earths those watercourses, allowing lantana to be the first thing that's washed back there, or the seeds that are already planted there, laying there, then take over those watercourses. The next infestation that comes through is like a bomb going off. Okay? It doesn't end with the fires when these materials are burnt off there and the government goes, oh, well, the evidence is now gone, so we can have a royal commission into this. We can have and manipulate these facts so the public never really knows. Why are these fires getting worse? Well, if you are into climate change, materials that create such massive releases of carbon and black carbon and minerals into the atmosphere and destroy subsoil health, turning all soils into just dirt and creating massive erosion issues, with the lantana still controlling the range country, you have so much coming back through those areas. And that is where the next wave is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. And you'd have the same criminals covering this stuff up. So until we deal with those issues, until we get very serious about what the repercussions are, that's what I say to you, the fires are going to get much worse. We lost 2 entire rainforests and created history in Queensland last year, around October, November. That has never happened in the history of our nation. And have you heard from one greenie? Have you heard from one climate change person? No, you haven't heard from anybody except me. This is the real story about when people say, oh, look, some life's coming back to these burnt-out areas. You watch the weeds take over now that there is no, well, not the weeds, it's Lantana camara. That thing expands at its very least, okay, these are government facts, at 400 new plants for a single plant growing, okay? So by the second year, you've got 400 plants times 400 plants. So you've got 160,000 plants at the end of the second year. By the time you get to the third year, you've got 160,000 plants, right, times 400. You've got 64 million plants growing there. That is absolutely staggering from one plant. And check this out. Go anywhere you want. Don't take my word for it. I'm hoping you don't take my word for it. I hope you go and say to the councils. So those figures are your figures. They're the state government biodiversity, biosecurity, bio figures. That's the expansion rate of Lantana. And you guys just decided to give up on it 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You just gave up. What was the plan for a material that burns like petrol and is responsible for killing our hardwood forests, our native gum trees that the koalas rely on? Do you see where all of this is going, right? Do you see how all of this is actually connected? Who gave them the right to give up? You know, when you look at it, they gave up on something that you cannot possibly call naturalised in Australia. That's another term they want to use. That means that they've given up and we just have to accept it there. But nothing lives in it and nothing lives under it when it gets to stage 2 and stage 3 infestation. So what is the future? The future is it will burn. It is guaranteed to burn eventually. The fires will come to that area and it turns every fire into a canopy fire. Plus the dead gum trees, plus the dead koalas, plus every other dead living thing. So is it very important that you start to wake up and look down the sides of the roads and understand it's completely illegal for that material to be there and be released into the environment? And that material can only be there on main roads, TMR, and whatever they call themselves in New South Wales lands, without the councils illegally turning a blind eye, because the councils are the police people. They are the policemen of this. Now, while we were on that subject before, saying, well, it's growing on your land, so you're frightened that if you have to clean it up, you're going to pay $5,000, $10,000 an acre. Well, you know, when these fires come through, the bigger fires, the monster fires, the 100-kilometre long fires, which DNRME admit are going to be the future of this, then you want to think to yourself, eventually this will come to the point where it has to be dealt with, where the public have lost 1,000 children and they are not so fondly looking at Morrison. They're not so fondly looking at Palaszczuk or the New South Wales Premier or the other premiers. They're not looking at them so fondly anymore. And then they're going to want your land cleaned up. And every single year that you allow those plants to prosper, they are prospering at another 400 plants. But if you're foolish enough to have allowed those materials to grow on the sides of the roads, every time lantana gets 25 millimetres of rain, it reseeds. So all of the roadside lantana is reseeding at around 6,000 new plants per plant. That's a completely different figure. You start getting 36 million plants from one single plant on your second year. 36 million times 6,000 is 216 billion plants from one single plant on the third year growing on the side of the road. And the seeds float. That's been proven. That's on record now. That's been on record for nearly 2 years. Around 2018, you proved that. So can you tell me, of that $250 billion problem, $500 billion problem, depending on the terrain it's in, that's what the price changes with, is floating all of those seeds illegally by the Biosecurity Act, which was created to protect our environment, our heritage, our lands, our future, our economies, our climate change. It was created for that purpose, and the people in biosecurity circumvented the law. You would think the Premier would be seriously going after those people and having them put in jail. But under environmental law, it is illegal for you to create an environmental disaster. So by definition, something that burns like petrol, grows in any sort of terrain and follows the watercourses, and nothing at all lives in it or under it in stage 2 or stage 3 infestations, it kills anything that eats it, including goats, on record by Department of Primary Industries. Nothing can eat this material. If you eat the berries on this material, it will kill you. It's on record as killing people in Australia and in South Africa and around the world, if you eat the berries or you eat the material. And yet these people just decided they'd give up on it because it was too costly. Now, just remember that's the sum total of what the state government and the councils tell you as to why they gave up on their lands. There is no place in the law that protects the government and says they have a special right. Okay, they're subject to exactly the same laws as you are. The Premier highlighted this in about 12 months ago when she wrote to me, and I'd upset her something terribly, and she said legally she can lower the classification, which is a lie, given that it is an environmental disaster. It's an absolute lie. But you wind that back and it states that every single land manager, so the managers of national parks, of TMR, are all subject to exactly the same laws as you do with your little acreage block or your big acreage block or your cattle station. They are subject by exactly the same laws. Only you never prosecuted them. You never sought to get justice for the materials put on your lands that in places like Lockyer Valley, you know, Sanford, all these places where you have decent infestations, the value of the property is worth half of what it was. The Sunshine Coast, half of what it was. The Gold Coast, half of what it was. Illegally infested by those materials flowing off those sides of those roads. And done illegally by the people who are supposed to police the environmental law. And they all did that with the premiers knowing they were doing it, knowing that they cannot have a law lower than theirs were. They knew that their biosecurity plans were illegal, and yet they never ever did anything to protect the koalas, to protect the environment, to protect your property and your property values and your local economies. So I am trying to get people to share this and understand this, and to get them to understand what the consequences are of this to their families when the next lot of fires come roaring through. You got to understand, a lot of those people who were nearly burned alive had that happen from 100 kilometres from their properties. The fires were 100 kilometres away. They weren't down the street and went through their properties. Naturally, some of them will have been closer to the source than that. But those fires went for hundreds of kilometres, unstoppable. And these fires are going to be much, much worse just by the sheer scale of material being released every day into this environment illegally. The cheapest way to deal with this material is deal with it immediately, which means you have to educate the greenies, you have to educate the climate change people, you have to educate the public to understand the moment this material shows up on your lands, get after it immediately. Now, how does that work with the current system of governance we have, where they're telling you it's low risk, it's very low risk, you don't have to worry about it? One day I'll explain to you exactly what that low risk and very low risk means, and you will be horrified that your premier, your scummo, could possibly conduct themselves on this basis. And all of those guys were invited to come to Queensland, to Brisbane, and be shown around these illegal infestations and have it explained to them how it affects the environment. I have 40 plus years in permanent eradication. I have no equal in the world, and these people will not come to hear the truth and see physically. Look, I'm fine. If they want to come there and they see all this material and I explain it all to them and they go, well, we don't really care about it, good for you. You have a crack at that. But they don't even have the guts and the courage to actually come and physically look at it. Instead, they followed criminals in biosecurity, in the state government departments and in the councils, and then they, on paper, have admitted to knowing. We need to have criminal court cases with these people and get all of this out in the open and start dealing with it, because the fires that are coming while we don't educate the public, because the public are the